Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them the three dimensions show themselves at once: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and the motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we focus on one essential component of the epistemic firewall. In this part 6, we cover the most fundamental filter in the firewall: logical constraints. This is the gate that guards the entrance to scientific discourse itself. The skill you will gain is the ability to detect claims that are not merely false, but non-meaningful. Claims that self-destruct before any experiment can be performed because they describe an impossible state of affairs. Our core question is, which rules fail before touching reality because they are internally inconsistent? This is the first and most severe check. It does not ask if a rule matches the world. It asks if the rule can even be conceived as a possible state of the world without contradiction. If it cannot, it is rejected at the firewall's outermost gate. It never enters the arena of empirical testing. The core concept is this: logical constraints enforce the coherence of description. They are the rules of meaningful speech about phi. If a proposed rule or statement is logically contradictory, it is not a candidate law of physics. It is a misuse of language. It asks for something that cannot be, not because nature forbids it, but because the description itself collapses. Let me state the audio equation that defines this filter. We say, a rule must be logically satisfiable. Formally, there must exist at least one phi sentence such that the rule can hold without contradiction. In symbolic terms, we require the existence of a phi of xt and its derivatives in some licensed window W that simultaneously satisfy all the conditions of the proposed rule. If no such phi sentence can be constructed, even in a simulated, ideal, noise-free reconstruction, the rule is logically dead. It describes nothing. Now, why is this necessary? The failure mode it prevents is the waste of centuries on nonsense posing as profundity. Throughout history, much intellectual energy has been spent debating propositions that are inherently contradictory, masked by vague or shifting language. Perpetual motion machines that claim to create energy from nothing while being a closed system. Descriptions of events that happened before they caused themselves. Claims of being in two mutually exclusive states in the same sense and at the same time. These are not difficult engineering problems. They are incoherent blueprints. The firewall must catch them immediately before resources, time, money, and belief are invested. Logical constraints protect the integrity of the scientific conversation by ensuring that what is being discussed is at least a possible topic of discussion. To understand this, consider a simple, concrete analogy from Afghan civic life. Imagine you are in a jirga, a traditional council, listening to a dispute about land. One man stands and makes a claim. This field is entirely mine, and also, at the same time, and in the same legal sense, it is entirely my brother's. The elders do not send surveyors to measure the field. They do not examine soil samples. They stop him immediately. The claim is logically inadmissible. It violates the very grammar of ownership and space. It asserts A and not A, for the same subject under the same conditions. To even begin a discussion, the claim must be reformulated into something coherent. We share the field, or part is mine, part is his, or we have alternating use rights. The jirga's first duty is to enforce logical coherence. Only then can evidence be heard. The Holophase firewall performs exactly this duty for claims about phi. In Holophase terms, what does a logical contradiction look like? Since all description is in terms of phi and its derivatives, and since these derivatives manifest as the triunity of omega, k, and v, contradictions appear as impossible demands on these three echoes. Let us analyze them one by one as the roadmap instructs. Contradiction. This is a demand for mutually exclusive temporal ordering. It requires an effect to precede its cause in the same causal chain and timeline. In the language of phi, it would be a demand that a certain value of phi or its derivative at time t be determined by a value at a later time t plus delta t in a way that cannot be resolved by a time-symmetric relation. But more fundamentally, it is a contradiction in the narrative of before and after. A classic example is, the light from the explosion reached me before the explosion occurred. Under ordinary meanings of reach, before, and occur, this is an omega contradiction. It is not a mysterious prediction of a new physics. It is a description that shreds the concept of sequence it relies on. Think of it in terms of a daily rhythm in Afghanistan. The call to prayer, the azan, marks time. Imagine someone said with full seriousness, I heard the azan for Maghrib, sunset prayer, before I heard the azan for Asr, afternoon prayer today. And I did not travel across time zones, and I mean this in the exact same sequence of one single day. Your mind rejects this not because you doubt the speaker's honesty first, but because the statement, under the shared meaning of before, afternoon, and sunset, is incoherent. It is an omega contradiction. The firewall's job is to recognize this class of nonsense immediately. Contradiction. Space. This is a demand for mutually exclusive spatial placement. It requires something to be in two different, mutually exclusive locations at the same time and in the same sense, without the concept of being spread out or having parts. In phi language, it would demand that phi of x1t and phi of x2t both have a specific property that is defined as exclusive to one location. The statement, the one indivisible Quran on this table is simultaneously in Kabul and in Herat right now, is a K contradiction under normal meanings of is, simultaneously, and indivisible. It is not a claim about teleportation or quantum superposition, which have precise, non-contradictory definitions, like amplitude distribution. It is a raw logical violation of spatial exclusivity. Consider the layout of a traditional Afghan home, with its clear separation of public and private spaces for guests. If a host says, you are seated in the Biruni, and you are also, in the same physical sense, seated in the Andoruni, he is not describing a grand metaphysical unity. He is uttering a spatial contradiction. The statement cannot be mapped to a coherent phi sentence describing a person's location. The firewall rejects it. Contradiction, motion. This is a demand for mutually exclusive motion definitions. It requires an object or pattern to have two contradictory velocities or directions of propagation at the same time and in the same sense. Since V is the bridge between omega and K, a V contradiction often implies an incoherent coupling between time and space changes. The statement, this river is flowing fully upstream and fully downstream in its main channel, is a V contradiction. It is not a description of turbulence, which is complex but coherent motion. It is a claim that the single defining direction of bulk flow is both north and south. No phi sentence capturing a river's flow can satisfy this. Imagine a bus on the road from Jalalabad to Kabul. A tracker says, The bus is moving toward Kabul and also, in the same sense, moving toward Jalalabad. This is not a statement about a winding road or a complex route. It is a direct V contradiction. Its meaning collapses. The firewall identifies such statements as logically inadmissible. Now we must formalize this in holophase ontology. A proposed rule, or grammar G, is a constraint on phi patterns. The first check is logical satisfiability. Can we conceive of, or mathematically construct, a phi xt and its derivatives, a potential phi sentence, that satisfies G? We are not asking if this sentence has been observed. We are asking if it is possible within the framework of logic and the meanings we have assigned to our symbols. The audio equation is phi the sentence such that G of phi is satisfiable. The symbol phi means there exists. This is an existence proof. For a rule to pass the logical constraint filter, such an existence must be demonstrable, at least in principle. If you cannot even mathematically write down a phi that obeys your proposed rule, the rule is nonsense. Let's take a concrete rule that fails this test. The value of phi at every point is both greater than 1 and less than 0. This is a direct logical contradiction, A and not A, for the value of phi. There exists no function phi of xt that can satisfy this. The rule is rejected immediately. No experiment is needed. A more subtle example is a rule that leads to an infinite regress, or a paradoxical self-reference. For instance, a rule that says, this grammar G is the only true grammar, and it asserts that all grammars, including itself, are false. This is a logical paradox. It cannot be consistently applied. It yields no stable ground for generating phi sentences. The firewall catches it. Now we must discuss energy as tele in the context of logical contradiction. Remember, energy is not a substance. It is an accounting of omega cohend V coherence. So what is the energy of a contradiction? It is not a large number. It is undefined. There is no coherent state to tele. The accounting ledger simply breaks. If you try to force the numbers, you get nonsense results like infinite energy required. But that is already a misinterpretation. The correct statement is, a logically contradictory state does not have a defined energy tele because it is not a state at all. It is a malformed description. Think of a shopkeeper in the bazaar of Mazar-e Sharif keeping his accounts. A customer proposes a transaction. I will give you 500 Afghanis and I will give you 0 Afghanis for this tea set in one single payment. The shopkeeper does not calculate the immense profit or loss. He sees that the ledger entry is incoherent. 500 and 0 in the same entry for the same transaction is not a difficult transaction. It is a meaningless one. The accounting category collapses. Similarly, a phi sentence that is logically contradictory has no place in the energy ledger. The firewall's role is to reject it before we try to balance the books. The operational interpretation of logical constraints is straightforward but rigorous. When a new theory or a bold claim is proposed, the first step in the episode 11 firewall is logical audit. This is done by trained theorists and logicians, not by experimentalists. The audit asks, 1. Is the theory expressed clearly in well-defined terms? No ambiguous metaphors. 2. Can its core propositions be written as constraints on phi and derivatives? 3. Do any of these constraints directly imply a logical contradiction, omega, k, or v contradiction? 4. Can we construct, at least mathematically, a non-contradictory phi sentence that obeys the rules? This audit is a formal procedure. It uses tools from logic and mathematics. Its outcome is binary, admissible or rejected. The firewall role of this mechanism is to block the entry of meaningless claims into the scientific pipeline. It protects the downstream processes, metagrammatical validation, empirical testing, from being clogged with noise. It enforces intellectual hygiene at the source. Let's state clearly what assumptions are allowed and forbidden by this logical constraint filter. You may propose rules that are counterintuitive, strange, and radically different from current physics. You may use abstract mathematics. You may challenge common sense. You may not propose rules that are logically self-contradictory under the agreed meanings of the terms used. You may not rely on vague language to hide contradictions. You may not dismiss logical audit as mere philosophy when it exposes fundamental incoherence. What happens when the check fails? The license consequence is immediate and severe, immediate rejection. The proposed rule is not granted a license to be considered a physical theory. It is archived as a logically incoherent proposition. It does not proceed to empirical testing. This is not a punishment, it is a triage. Resources are directed toward ideas that are at least possible. Now, we must state the explicit prediction and falsification for logical constraints. Prediction. A logically coherent rule admits at least one simulated phi sentence that satisfies it under ideal, noise-free reconstruction. That is, if the rule is meaningful, you should be able to use a computer or a thought experiment to generate a possible world, a set of phi values over space and time that obeys the rule. This simulated sentence demonstrates the rule's logical satisfiability. Falsification of the rule's logical coherence. If no such sentence can be conceived or constructed, if every attempt to instantiate the rule leads to a contradiction in the definitions of omega, k, or v, then the rule is logically falsified. It is dead on arrival. The falsification condition is the impossibility of construction. It is vital to note a key nuance here. What often looks like a logical contradiction is actually a representational confusion. Our concepts of same time, same place, same sense might be too crude. The genius of physics is often to refine these concepts and dissolve the apparent contradiction. This is not an exception to logical constraints, it is their sophisticated application. Let's use an Afghanistan-inspired example to illustrate this refinement. Two travelers argue. One says, the mountain pass is to the north. The other says, no, it is to the west. This seems like a K contradiction about the direction to the same location. But a savvy local interjects, clarifying the representation. You are both pointing from different trailheads. From where you stand, traveler 1, it is north. From your village, traveler 2, it is west. There is no contradiction. You are using different coordinate systems. The apparent logical conflict dissolves when the frame of reference is made explicit. The underlying reality, the location of the pass, is consistent. In physics, the classic example is the apparent omega contradiction in special relativity. My clock runs slow compared to yours, and your clock runs slow compared to mine. Taken naively, this seems contradictory. A is less than B, and B is less than A. But relativity refines the concepts of same time and comparison. It introduces the relativity of simultaneity. The contradiction vanishes when the description is made precise within the new framework. The rule, Lorentz invariance, is logically satisfiable. We can construct many phi sentences, solutions to relativistic wave equations, that obey it perfectly. Therefore, the firewall skill is not to shout contradiction at the first sign of strangeness. The skill is to attempt a representation rescue. Can we clarify our definitions? Can we make our coordinate systems explicit? Can we refine our understanding of same sense? Often, this rescue leads to deeper, more powerful theories. But if, after honest and rigorous clarification, the contradiction remains, if the rule still demands A and not A under the refined meanings, then the firewall slams shut. The rule is rejected. Now we must state the mandatory episode 11 axioms in this context. Rules do not become real by elegance, consensus, or tradition. They earn a license only by surviving falsification, variation, independence, and scope discipline. Logical constraints are the very first discipline. A rule that cannot survive logical falsification by being provably incoherent never gets a license. And when a rule fails, we do not believe harder. We tighten, downgrade, or retire its license. Here, failure at the logical gate results in the strictest action: license denied, retirement before entry. The skill you gain from this part is logical triage. You learn to identify the smell of incoherence in a claim. You learn to ask, can this be stated as a coherent constraint on phi? Does it demand mutually exclusive omega, k, or v relations? Can I even imagine a world where this is true? This skill saves you from chasing chimeras and allows you to focus intellectual energy on ideas that are strange but possible. Let's apply this to a common class of fallacies: perpetual motion machines of the first kind, creating energy from nothing. The claim often is, this closed system outputs more usable energy than it takes in, continuously. When translated into Holophase terms, energy is a tally of omega per k by from V coherence. A closed system means no external phi influences altering the tally. The claim is that the tally, energy, increases over time without any external source or internal depletion of some other form of tally. This quickly leads to a logical contradiction with the definition of a closed system and conservation of the tally derived from the phi grammar. One can prove mathematically that no phi sentence describing a closed system can have this property if the underlying grammar, like the principle of least action, is logically consistent. Therefore, the claim is not just empirically false, it is logically inadmissible given the current framework. It is rejected at the firewall. Now, could a new framework overthrow conservation? Possibly, but that new framework must itself be logically coherent and specify what closed system and energy tally mean in its new terms. The burden is on the proposer to demonstrate logical satisfiability within their new scheme. We must also address infinite contradictions. Some rules lead to infinities in their description of simple states. For example, a rule that says the force between two particles is inversely proportional to the cube of the distance and becomes infinite at zero distance, and this is a stable state. This often leads to logical contradictions, because an infinite value in a fundamental field phi is not a defined state. It breaks the continuum description itself. It implies a phi sentence that is not a function in the usual sense. The firewall would flag this as likely incoherent, demanding a reformulation that avoids the undefined infinity for physical states. Now let's summarize the epistemic function of this part as required. We have defined logical constraints as the firewall filter that enforces coherence of description. A rule must be logically satisfiable. There must exist at least one possible phi sentence that obeys it. Contradictions manifest as impossible demands on the triunity: omega, time ordering, k, spatial placement, and v, motion definition. Energy, as a tally, is undefined for contradictory states. The explicit prediction is that a logically coherent rule admits at least one simulated phi sentence that satisfies it. The explicit falsification condition is the impossibility of constructing such a sentence, proving the rule self-contradictory. The license consequence is immediate rejection. The rule does not enter empirical testing. This strengthens the firewall by providing the first and most stringent gate. It ensures that the scientific conversation is about possible worlds. It is the foundation upon which all other empirical and metagrammatical disciplines are built. Without it, we could not even begin to distinguish a false rule from a meaningless string of words. If you want to see the full mathematical derivations and exact equations behind this idea, you can search for Holophase on Zenodo. There you will find the scientific papers that this audio journey is built on. Carry this foundational skill with you. Before you are amazed by a claim, before you invest hope in an idea, subject it to the logical triage. Ask for its possible phi sentence. Hunt for hidden contradictions in omega, k, and v. This is how you maintain sanity in a world full of persuasive nonsense. Now we bridge to the next constraint. Logical consistency is necessary, but is it sufficient? A rule can be perfectly logical, but still violate the basic premises of our chosen description of reality. It might demand the existence of things outside phi. Logical consistency is necessary, but is the rule even allowed in our ontology? This leads us to the next filter, ontological constraints. Salam, and peace be upon you.